In this clip, we'll chat about hard drive cables and connectors. Happily, there aren't as many currently popular hard drive cabling schemes as there are video cabling schemes. These days, for PCs at least, there's really only one popular one, SATA, which stands for Serial Advanced Technology Attachment. An external version of SATA is basically gone these days, although I'll still tell you about it so you can pass your exam. Servers often use a scheme called SAS for Serial Attached SCSI, so we'll show you what that looks like. And in the distant past, computers used IDE hard drives, which are on the A+ terms list, so we have to mention them, if only briefly. Well, SATA is the most important hard drive cable type for us to know about these days. It's very popular, and different versions of it run at different speeds. There's 3 gigabits per second SATA, 6 gigabits per second SATA, and so forth. Now, one convenient aspect of SATA is that the same cables work for both 3.5-inch and 2.5-inch drives. In most implementations, we have one connector for data transfer and a different cable for power. The data cable has 7 wires, and the power cable has 15, which seems like a high number until we realize that the power cable is actually delivering 3 different sets of voltages. Both the signal and power cables are keyed, that is, they have an asymmetrical L shape so that they cannot be installed backwards or upside down. Here's a photo of a typical SATA data cable with a securing clip, and here's the matching connector on a hard drive. You can see the L shape a little bit better on the hard drive photo. Here's a photo of a typical SATA power cable that would be coming off of a PC's power supply unit, and the matching connector on the hard drive. Again, you can see the L shape. Notice that the power cable has more conductors and is wider than the signal connector. Well, here's what an internal hard disk drive looks like with both SATA power and signal cables connected up. This is a 2.5-inch drive, but the connectors are the same as on the 3.5-inch drive in the previous photos. By the way, SATA is not limited to spinning disk hard drives. It's also the interface of choice for 2.5-inch internal solid-state drives, which use the same connectors as their magnetic siblings. Now, sometimes we may want to connect a SATA device to a USB port, such as, for example, if we just want to see what's on a SATA drive without having to open our PC's enclosure. And here's an adapter that can do that job. Now, the external flavor of SATA, or eSATA, is something that one might find on laptops of a certain age. The initial eSATA ports provided a signal path, but no power, and users were understandably a bit annoyed by having to supply power separately to their external SATA drives. Later versions added power plus USB compatibility, and they looked a little bit different, as you can see from the picture. But by that time, it was really too little, too late. eSATA could go up to 6 gigabits per second, which sounds pretty fast, but isn't really much faster than USB 3. The maximum cable length was 2 meters. Serial Attached SCSI is a more successful interface, and it's still around today. The name derives from an earlier signaling standard called SCSI for Small Computer Systems Interface. This was a parallel interface in which there were separate wires for each bit in a byte, and sometimes enough for 2 bytes at a time, or 16 bits wide, making the cables kind of thick, expensive, and seriously limited in length. Serial Attached SCSI uses a lot of the old SCSI commands, but in a faster serial method where the bits come one after another instead of in a bunch. SAS connections are much more apt to be found in servers rather than user computers. The drives are typically faster and more robust than the typical consumer SATA drive, but they also typically cost more. There are a handful of connector types for the motherboard end of a SAS cable. I'm pretty confident you won't need to know about these for the exam. But the hard drive side often uses a connector that looks a lot like SATA, but combines the data part and the power part into a single molded connector, as shown at left, and as you can see in this photo of a SAS cable, which is configured to support 4 disk drives, those are the connectors on the left, from one motherboard plug, and that's the connector on the right. By the way, just because a SAS drive has practically the same connector as a SATA drive, that does not mean that a SAS drive will necessarily work with a motherboard built for SATA drives. Now, the opposite is sometimes true, though. That is, sometimes a SATA drive can work with an SAS controller. Okay, and now for that promised 30 seconds on IDE drives. So IDE stands for Integrated Drive Electronics, and these drives are also sometimes referred to as PATA or ATA drives. They were pretty much everywhere in the 1990s, used for hard drives, diskette drives, and optical drives. IDE was a parallel interface that moved 16 bits at a time through either a 40-wire or an 80-wire flat cable. and it used a 4-pin friction-fit Molex connector for power. Here's the power connector on an IDE drive and the corresponding plug coming off a PC power supply. And now you know your way around hard drive cables and connectors.